Hey, what's up, everybody? Got a good episode for you today. Got Adam from Shamanic Philosophy and the Wayfinder podcast on the show. I came across Adam through his Instagram handle, Shamanic Philosophy, and I just noticed that I was liking all of the posts. Every time he would post something, it would be like, oh, cool, this is great. This is good information. Keep it coming. Good wisdom, good quotes, good inspirational stuff. And then I discovered that he had a podcast where he's talking about, all kinds of things from, culture and Kundalini and conspiracies and just esoteric knowledge and ideas, Hermeticism and archetypes, and just all the really good stuff that we dabble in on this show. And he's really kind of laying it out there and interviewing people about alchemy and hypnosis and the universal language of math and these sorts of things. Also psychedelics as well. So he's a very interesting guy, and I thought we had a good conversation. He's an entrepreneur, philosopher, a musician, a writer, outdoor enthusiast, and a shamanic wayfinder. Really interesting. They're diving deep in the shamanic philosophy land, in ancient mysteries and wisdom, alternative history, psychedelic exploration, and the nature of reality. What the good, all the good stuff, all the good things that I like to think about, that you guys like to think about. We want to know, we want to explore, and we get curious about why things are the way they are, if they're not really aligning with how we're living our lives. Is there something more? Is there something else? Well, thankfully, we live in the time that we live in where we have access to the internet, and the internet really changes the game completely, because just like every single thing that we experience in our reality, they can be used for positive, or they can be used for destructive purposes. They could be used for improving and learning and growing and entertaining and getting curious, connecting, sharing, communicating ideas, having dialogue, having discourse, civil discourse, right? Agreeing to disagree and arguing from respectful points of view. Or we could, take in the direction that seems to get played up the most, because we are a storytelling animal that likes to create narratives of heroes and villains and these sorts of things. And so we get wrapped up in this sort of, villainistic, I guess, world, so to speak. That it can be that way if you allow yourself to check out, right? But there's also maybe some benefits to that, if that's what you choose, if that's what's appealing to you about this experience. But if you're feeling like there's maybe a little inner conflict, and the things that you're engaging with aren't really serving you and aren't really fulfilling you deeply at a soul level, I think everybody's had these moments in their life where they really feel alive and they feel like they're in the zone, they're in the moment, and time stands still and space is gone and everything is just wow, like whatever it is, drinking a cold glass of water on a really hot day and you're really thirsty, that moment of like, and sometimes, we try and just get that moment without going through the suffering of the heat and then the relief of the cold water. And that's a way to go too. That's definitely a way to go. But there's other ways to go, and I know people that like this show like to explore those ways, and I think you'll find this conversation I had with Adam of Shamanic Philosophy and the Wayfinder podcast to be really interesting. I sure did, and I can't wait to dive into more of his stuff. So with that being said, just a little bees nass, shite. Hemp Bombs. Go get CBD, 15% off. Enter the code Mike15 at checkout. SYNCHRO, enter the code. Go to bsynchro.com for keto, plant-based nutrition products. Enter the code Micadelic and get 20% off. I'm really giving it my all with these with these sponsors, maybe, but I don't know. I like the Patreon model, to be honest with you, better, because it's like, if you enjoy something and you want to support it, and then I don't have to like hawk this stuff, even though I think it's good stuff. I mean, that's the only reason why I do it. But still, it's a thing that I have to do, and it's, so if you get value from the show, I'd appreciate if you went to patreon.com/MikeBrank, and you could become a patron for as little as $1 a month, and I'll do bonus episodes, and there's stickers and T-shirts, and I'll come to your house and live with you for a week, whatever. There's all kinds of rewards. So I'm getting my gear, and I'm moving it in here with you. Go watch the Chris Farley Down by the River sketch. After you get and absorb the wisdom and the knowledge of this podcast, take 5 minutes to watch that, because we all need to be entertained as well and to laugh. So yeah, that'd just be a good way. And if you don't have an extra fake piece of paper that the Federal Reserve issues out as a note for something to exchange with other people with, if you don't have any of those things, that's cool. Just if you like the show, just tell people about it, and go to Apple Podcasts if you can. Click a 5-star review. That'd be great. I'll accept anything, but if you have any suggestions, criticisms, or whatever for the show, feedback, just message me. I always respond. Go to my website, mikebrank.com, and find the contact page there. You could send me an email. You could find me on Facebook, Instagram, wherever. Reach out. I love hearing back from you guys and talking with you. It's one of my favorite things to do. So you could do that too. And I think that's about it. I don't know. I always forget if I have like announcements or something coming up, but I'll get to that at some point. Let's just get into the show, because it's a good one. And without further ado, Adam from Shamanic Philosophy and the Wayfinder podcast.
Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window. Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong.
We don't need new laws that control our consciousness and rigidly place it in a prison.
Cognitive liberty. The fact that as adults, if we're not hurting anybody else, we should have the right to explore the contours of our own consciousness without any mediation or legislation on the part of somebody else.
Reject authority. Authority is a lie.
Voice of perception.
Information is power, but we have to seize the opportunity.
You?
I am in Denver, Colorado.
Man, I love Colorado.
Yeah, I just moved here in January, and I am loving it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite places. We travel there and take the camper and the kids and stuff and go hang out in the mountains a lot. We like it down there.
Nice. Oh, you have kids?
Yeah, I got a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Oh, wow. Cool, man. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, it's good to get out with the family and get out in nature and share that experience. There's nothing like it.
Yeah, man. It's nice, for the kids to kind of get a reset. I mean, it's nice for everybody to get a reset, but kids especially, I think they kind of have an uphill battle. They have a whole culture of childhood now that's built around technology, and it's just not how I grew up out in the country. So
yeah,
kind of just instills a different value set and a different sensory experience of your everyday life.
Definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. The pressures on children these days it's not like what we had, and obviously not like what our parents had. It's a tremendous pull to this technological behemoth that can suck your soul right out. But if you're there for too long, but learning how to use it in balance. So where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Dallas in a little farm town, about 200 people or so. It was a pretty small area, but I grew up fishing and playing in the woods and climbing trees and making tree houses and stuff like that, swinging across creeks with chopped off vines and stuff, George of the Jungle stuff,
Yeah. I mean, that's what everyone wants to do, I think, when they're a kid, and certainly I did that too. And that George of the Jungle kind of what's this story with the I was about to say Dick Van, Huckleberry Finn, Huck Finn, like out, that kind of stuff. That's really, I think, in my opinion, that's what kids need, like a world of discovery where there's a little bit of danger and you're not being helicopter parented by these beasts that are telling you what to do. Did you have how was your upbringing? Was it good? Were you were able to explore and be free and discover?
Yeah, I had a pretty cool upbringing, and I didn't really fully appreciate how cool my upbringing was until, really the last few years, and just talking to more people who've had different kinds of upbringing, different kinds of parents and all that, and realized finally that my parents were really pretty balanced people. They were sort of
Hey, sorry, can I stop you for one second? I'm getting a little wind in the. Are you outside or?
Yeah, I am. Hold on, let me get somewhere else. But so I grew up outside doing all kinds of stuff, and my parents they let me kind of roam around and get scrapes and cuts and bruises and poison ivy and all that, and kind of learn how to pay attention to things, which I think incidentally kind of is one of the problems with how a lot of us are parenting our kids now is. We don't really let them expose themselves to risk, and we don't let them figure stuff out, and so they don't really ever learn to pay attention.
Right.
So their threat tolerance is unhealthily low, right? They're not really willing to take risks or any of that stuff, and you see that manifest in all kinds of different ways.
Totally, yeah, and with the kids, it's like starting from this like blank canvas that you're painting on. And then that manifests as they grow into the adults that then are in positions of authority in the world and things like that. And, that has its problems too. We sort of live in this world where it's really kind of, we're trying to sterilize everything and put it into nice little neat packages and boxes, but that's not really how things work, right?
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it can work that way, but it doesn't work very well. Because the reality is that people aren't perfect, and there are bad people out there, there are good people out there, but whenever you're only getting one narrative pushed at you from the news, it's really easy to live in this sort of fear space and raise your kids, like a helicopter parent.
Man, that is such a great perspective to have, and such a breath of fresh air. And thank you for operating in that space, in this complex, almost paradoxical, nuanced space of the gray. We tend to want to put everything into, this binary category of like, this is good, this is bad, this, and so that's awesome that you're able to do that. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you too, because, your Instagram account, Shamanic Philosophy, and the Wayfinder podcast, it seems like that's the kind of content that you're putting out. That's the kind of conversation that you're looking to have, right? To explore these areas and ask these questions. Does that sound fair to say?
No, that's it. I mean, and really, it's about trying to help people find and maintain balance in their lives in an unbalanced world. You just mentioned the gray area, right? Well, I mean, what's a gray area? It's really the balanced midpoint between two extremes. So you have certainty on one side in this case, and you have total chaos or uncertainty on the other. And if you live in total chaos, I mean, that's not how you want to raise your kids. Right? They want to understand what stability looks like, because there are all kinds of ramifications if that doesn't happen. Kids who aren't exposed to stability have all kinds of, issues down the road. And then kids who are helicopter parented, who lived in a state of absolute certainty and safety their whole lives, they don't really understand that balance. And, that's really what I want to do with my podcast and with, my social media platform, is to just put out, really, it's just putting out my journey, because it's not like I've always understood this stuff, right? So it's kind of my journey in real time to finding balance and helping to impart that whatever wisdom I come across to my kids and my family, and my friends, and my circle of impact after that.
Yeah, that's great. And then, the people beyond that too. That's how these ideas spread, is you start touching those people around you, and then more people, and then they tell their friends. So it's good. It's good to be putting that message out in the world, and it's one that I'm on board with. Can you share a little bit about your story? Like tell a little bit about your journey and discovery and wanting to kind of to do the things that you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of funny because when I've gone through this before, but like when I look back, it all seems so clear. But for most of my life, I was kind of just drifting through life and riding the responsibility train, and just kind of trying to do what a lot of people do, right? Just take care of your family, solve problems, and all that stuff. But really, when I was 5 years old, I found this book on my dad's bookshelf, and it was a book on like mystic places, and it had a pyramid on the front and had a sphinx and said mystic places, and it was a part of a bigger book set with like 20 books, and it was a bunch of esoteric stuff. And so I read this thing, and as soon as I opened this book up, like 5 years old, I see Atlantis and ancient Egypt and Lemuria and all this stuff in this book. Blavatsky was in there, and I thought, man, this is fascinating. So my whole life, I was always attracted to the esoteric, to the occult, and to magic and the Illuminati and Atlantis and all that. And it was always kind of just a guilty pleasure or a nerdy indulgence on the side of, the rest of my life. It wasn't ever something I took all that seriously, but I always had questions from a young age that were, sort of metaphysical questions, what happens after we die, and, how does spirits work and how does energy work? And so, I grew up in a house that wasn't religious really. My mom was really open to whatever. My dad didn't really care. So I didn't have what a lot of people have, which is a lot of religious indoctrination. And I also didn't have two militant atheist parents. They would kind of let me do what I wanted to do. So when I told them I wanted to start going to church, I was curious about some things. They didn't have any problem with it. So, I went from one church to another as a kid, probably 10 years old on, trying to find answers to these questions. And, finally, developed a pretty solid spiritual belief system in Christianity, 16, 17 years old. And by the time I was 20, 21, I was, married and had kids, and, was thinking differently, and got really into like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris and Dan Dennett and Richard Dawkins and, all the, Lawrence Krauss, all the atheistic, guys. And so, I kind of took on that belief set for most of my 20s, but, I never lost track of, in the back of my mind, these things I had read that, that seemed like fantasy for most of my life. And certainly at that time, they felt like fantasy. But I was, I discovered Graham Hancock when I was like 18 and was reading his books. And, I always had, I guess, in my subconscious, I just thought this is all fantasy. And then about 4 years ago, went through some life changes and took, my first really big dose of mushrooms. I had done them when I was like a teenager and stuff, but, never really in a very thoughtful setting. But so I took a big dose of mushrooms, and then everything that I had ever learned about the esoteric and spiritual philosophy and occult ideologies and mysticism, and it all just clicked. All the dots connected, and it all made sense, and it was the most profound experience of my life. And so, I had all this knowledge by this point, and I'd never taken it seriously. And so 4 years ago, I started taking it seriously, and started working my way into a more spiritual lifestyle and a less materialistic lifestyle, and looking after aspects of myself that I never really believed existed, the mystical parts of our mind and spiritual parts of our nature. And so for the last, 4 years, it's been a pretty crazy journey of self-discovery and integration of lessons, and, furthering my own understanding of, who I am and what I'm here to do, and then trying to pass it on to other people. And that's been done a variety of ways, but, through sort of a mishmash of belief systems, that I carry around in my head, largely oriented on Buddhism and Hinduism and shamanism and Hermeticism, really, Neoplatonism. And, I just was always fascinated with Native American culture and shamanism, and that was also one of those books that I read when I was a kid too, was on shamanism. And so, that's sort of the grounding, the grounding post for my spiritual philosophy, this cocktail of ideologies I've kind of crammed together. But, that's, I think that having a spiritual life, ostensibly spiritual life, can really enrich the way that people live. It can enrich their families, their relationships. And, it starts at its core with being open and understanding to different belief systems. And most of all, being aware that different people do carry different belief systems, because that's something that, a lot of kids that are brought up in a specific church or doctrine, they're taught this sort of dichotomous, we're right, everybody else is wrong. It's black or white. But you mentioned this gray area earlier, and that's really the thing that, we talk about in our house, is that there are a lot of different ways to believe. There are a lot of different people out there that believe different things. And, if you think critically and you only allow yourself to be guided by love and understanding, then, the validity of different belief systems become pretty self-evident.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to package it. Is like, start from there. That's your base for the soup that you're making in this life, and take in the things that taste good to you, and put it that way, because you're right. There's an infinite number of belief systems, and it's not just put into the ones that we think of as religious packages, but there's belief systems about money and government and power and etiquette and all of these types of things. So
sure,
the diversity and novelty of it all is, in my opinion, what makes it interesting. But it's really cool that you kind of turned on that way, that you had that experience, having all that prior knowledge, and then having that knowledge kind of confirmed, or that feeling that you had being confirmed.
Yeah, it was really, it was an interesting sort of revelation to me, because, I own an IT solutions company. That's what I do. And we've been in business since 2005. And so we provide, information security and information technology services for businesses all over the U.S. And we started out in the healthcare sector in hospitals, and branched out into virtually every other industry that there is. And so it's a very left brain world. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with the concept of left and right brain, concepts, but it's a very left brain world, right? I mean, it's computers and digits and spreadsheets and budgets and timelines and project management and, all that stuff. And, it's on top of that, being on the corporate side of it, dealing with other, corporations and stuff. It's a very masculine energy, sort of straight lines, straight edges. There's not a lot of flex, and there's not a lot of, room for, emotion or feelings or any of that stuff. You're just kind of a problem solving robot. So that's what I did all through, since 2005, really. And, it's easy to get into that boat and never get out. And so in that mind space, it was really easy for me to just keep all of these esoteric things that I have been reading about my whole life that were so fascinating to me. It was easy to relegate those to the sci-fi bin, right? Put them up on the shelf next to Lord of the Rings.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think a good that's a sign of good intelligence, though, is a healthy dose of skepticism, I think, in my opinion. And that's good for you to have that awareness at a young age. You talked about seeing this book at 5 and then getting interested and going to church at 10. So that's a pretty good container to start with.
Yeah, I think so. The cool thing is I was blessed because, and this is, I guess, kind of also a root of the change that has taken place in my life was an understanding of gratitude, right? Because I have a lot of gratitude for the fact that I was born, A, very, very curious, and B, into a family that allowed curiosity to do its thing, right?
Yeah.
So whether I wanted to go flip over a rock and see if there was a snake underneath it, or go see if I could swing across a creek on a vine, or, see if I could swim all the way across the channel at the lake, or if I wanted to go to church and try to learn something, that was maybe my parents didn't understand or whatever. So, I didn't do anything to contribute to that, right? I mean, it's just sheer good fortune that I was born into that family, into my family, and that I was born curious. And so that was another sort of revelation that came to me at the outset of this whole journey 4 years ago, was that, we have every reason in the world to be grateful. Just the fact that we're able to sit and have a conversation, or hold hands with our kids, or have a job to go to, or have, a home to live in, or whatever. Life is really just a long stream of chance and outcome, and how you react to that outcome. And it's all a bunch of spirals, and so it's, I think once I realized that, that I was one of a trillion sperm that made the journey, and then I was born into my family and born with, curiosity and whatever gifts that I have, I didn't do anything to deserve any of that. I didn't do anything to contribute to it. And so just understanding, that put me into a place I'd never been in before, which was sort of a place of faith. I developed faith for the first time, even though I was, a practicing Christian as a teenager. And in my early 20s, I always used to tell my preachers and stuff, like, I don't have faith. I need to understand stuff. I need to know. Stuff needs to make sense. If I ask you a question as a preacher, don't tell me.
I felt the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was open with that. And, I was kind of ashamed of it as a Christian. I was like, man, I don't have faith, but God at a point made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah,
and
but
so
that's the worst
it.
answer that an adult can give a kid who's like us, who's curious, asking questions, because that's just the way it is. Or like, it's just, that's because that's what we said. It's like, hey, we have questions. Can you please like do us the respect of answering us? Like Alan Watts says, the way that we treat children are like not like humans. We treat them like candidates for humanity. And it's like they have a say in this as well too, right? We're here, we're conscious. We all remember what it's like to be a child, a curious child.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that most parents are doing the best they can, right? I know that my mom, she's never considered herself to be a scholar, right? She probably didn't do great in school, but she's got a huge heart. She's the best lady that I've ever met. And she was always willing to sit down with me as a little kid and open up a dictionary or an encyclopedia and just learn new words or show me new places or whatever. And she didn't have the answers. She was, she was open to sitting down with me and helping find those answers. A lot of parents don't have that outlook, or they don't have the time, or they don't understand. We're kind of creatures of imitation as humans, right? And so if we grow up in a house where we don't see that, we don't know to do it. And so I didn't do that for a long time, and I've spoken about this, several times. I was not a great dad for the first 10 years or 9 years of my oldest son's life, and the first, however many years of my now 9-year-old son's life. I was working a lot. I was caught up in the corporate world, trying to do the materialism thing and have stuff and do stuff and grow a company. And, I didn't know any other way to be. And it really wasn't until this journey started where I realized, like, man, these little kids, they need your time, they need your affection, they need your understanding, they need your guidance. They need the impression that you can leave on them, and you need to make sure that's a positive one. So I set my kids down and said, guys, look, I kind of sucked at this job when I got it, and I didn't know how I didn't know how to do it, but some things are going to change. My behavior is going to be different going forward. I'm not perfect, so I'm going to screw up, but I want to be more patient and more open to understanding and make myself more available for you. And if you ever feel like I'm slipping up on that, call me out on it. And they did. And it enriched our relationship so much. And, I'm so thankful for that. More than anything is that I can honestly say I wasn't a great dad. I was doing my best, but, the path that I have my kids on wasn't really the path I would want them on, seeing things more clearly now.
Yeah.
But over the last 4 years, I've integrated these lessons and, really, our lives, our relationships are better than they've ever been. And, a lot of that, obviously I would love to take credit for all of it, but, it was really the systematic and periodic use of psychedelics where, that opened my eyes to what my behavior was in reality. Right. So of course, I'm a big advocate of psilocybin mushrooms and, doing, a good sized psilocybin trip once every quarter, something like that. Every seasonal change, however you want to do it. They sort of act like windshield wipers, and they get all the crap off the windshield, and you can see, what your behavior has really been like. How have you really been treating people? Have you really been neglecting your kids, or have you been doing a pretty good job? Have you been rude to your spouse or your partner a few times, because work is stressing you out? And they sort of put a spotlight on all that stuff and let you explore, your experiences, your behaviors, your attitudes, thoughts, moods, actions, and relationships. And, they give you remarkably clear insight into what you can do to fix those things. And so I would come back from a trip and integrate that stuff. And 3 or 4 months later, I'd go back and visit, and the trip would be a lot easier, a lot more pleasant. and they'd say, okay, you're doing a lot better. A few more things we can work on here, but you're doing a whole lot better. And so finally, after a couple of years of that, I had my first mushroom trip that was just really, it was just pleasant start to finish. And up until then, they had all been tough to one degree or another. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about, particularly with mushrooms, but also like ayahuasca and San Pedro and stuff like that. That if you're not acting right and you go into a trip, you're going to pay for it.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Kind of like Santa Claus is coming for your kids, It's like they want to act good because Santa Claus is coming. It's like you want to act good because you have a trip coming up in a couple of weeks and you're going to pay for everything you've done since your last trip.
Right. Yes, exactly. No, this is such a good point, and amazing that you went on this healing journey and were able to integrate and apply it to your life. And yeah, it's incredible. The thing that kind of stood out to me was that, right, the common misconception with psychedelics is that you're going to trip out and you're going to see dragons or whatever. People that are naive, they don't know what these things are. And here you are telling this beautiful story because these, in my opinion, if you use them with the right intention as tools, they don't make you see things that aren't there and, are fake, so to speak, as the common misconception is. They bring you into intense reality, and they cause you to face that intense reality. And it takes a lot of courage and strength to do that. And I think in this world of illusions that we've created, these necessary illusions, that can be really fracturing for a lot of people, to do that. And I think that's why there's a little fear around it as well. But yeah, that's just where my mind went with that, because these are they can be such healing tools and transformative tools, so that now you're free, you're liberated to walk your path and continue this journey of checking in and remembering, while also sharing wisdom that can benefit a lot of people, because not a lot of people have an opportunity to grow up that way. I didn't, but if we can maybe teach others that these tools and these techniques and this wisdom and this way to try and raise kids or whatever, that's a very needed message for sure.
Yeah, I think so. And that's why I do what I do in the way that I do it, right? Is, I can see what a dramatic impact the way that I operate now and the way that our house is managed now and our family is managed now. I can see the ripples of impact in my kids in terms of how confident they are, how open-minded they are, how much they curiosity they have about nature and about the world and spirituality and just knowledge in general, right? And of course, as a part of all of this other sort of way of living, more of a naturalistic way of living, we spend more time doing art, and we write and we read, and the kids really like to draw and put their drawings up on the fridge and all that stuff. And so all that stuff exercises, the creative centers in our brain. And again, I mean, that's something that's really needed, because that's really the opposite of what they're getting in certainly in public education, but really probably in most private education as well. A lot of straight lines, a lot of
the traditional model of schooling in general. This general weird, static conception that we have that, like, this is the only model of learning, is to sit in desks in a building with people your age, and that whole thing.
It's a factory.
Yeah.
It's a factory. And so that's, when I started doing this, that was one of the first things I realized I needed to do with this platform, was to talk about parenting. Talking about parenting is something that I do a lot. And I think that, the response that I get from a lot of the people that follow the podcast and the Instagram page, I get messages all the time from parents who say, "Man, thanks so much for this video or for this podcast or this post that you made or whatever it is, because I've thought for a long time that I want to find a way to raise my kids in a sensibly spiritual way, or help them understand the world in more complex terms, but I don't really have a model for that." And you kind of, I think, been able to provide people with some kind of an outlook that they can adopt, and some methodologies they can adopt in their house to parent their kids, and that'll always be something that's very, very near and dear to my heart.
Sure, and I think that it's good. You know, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell, this kind of hero's myth, hero's journey, and you know that is something I think we're faced with maybe with almost every moment of every day, right? Like we get a call to do something. Are we going to do it? Make a choice. But this, you know, kind of answering that call and accepting sort of the what can be sometimes maybe a burden or a challenge of the sort of gift that you're supposed to share, because that's it doesn't happen by accident. There's nothing worse than somebody that has discovered has a lot of information, has a lot of knowledge, right? Like I was watching Back to the Future the other day, and George McFly, he writes these science fiction books, but he's like, oh, they're never going to be good, right? So these people that have this interest and this passion, and I know a lot of people that listen to the show definitely do, and that's why they tune in. What would you like? What would you say to like how to follow that call, or how to listen, how to tune in and hear that instruction?
Well, I think that getting into nature is one of the most important things we do, and it's one of the most important practices that we've lost. Right? It's one of the most powerful habits we've gotten out of. What we talked about just at the beginning of the show, it's really easy to get locked inside and get in front of a TV. We have Netflix and Vudu and HBO and all kinds of stuff, right? So it's as long as we remain distracted as opposed to being mindful and present, it's really easy to block out that inner voice that's calling us to go on the hero's journey, And I know for me, a lot of the times it was work, and it was work and kids and video games or, just whatever responsibilities I had in my life. And we're sort of conditioned to think that, if you're stressed out, go home and have a couple of drinks whenever you walk in the door, and that'll decompress you, and then sit down in front of, Netflix and throw on a stand-up comedy special or something like that. And that stuff's great. I'm not saying that no one should have a drink here and there, and no one should watch comedy. I can do that too, but, just not understanding that there may be a higher purpose, that we're called to in our lives. And that, if you pursue that higher purpose, you'll find that, that the universe will conspire to support you. I forget whoever said that, the universe will get behind you and help push you down that road. But you've got to be mindful and present enough to stop and identify that that's even a thing.
Right.
I thought my calling was to run a technology company. Right. And it was because I was distracted and living in the world of technology companies. So
yeah, I mean,
you got to be present.
You totally have to be present, and it's really, really fucking hard. And I get distracted to this day all the time. But there was a time in my life where I was just looking for the bliss express, like most people are. It's just like, put me on the train to ecstasy and never stop, just stacking one thing, material thing, the next show, the next party, the next thing, whatever. And that is definitely available to us and highly suggested to say, hey, do this, do these things, right? People, but the message of that you're talking about here, there's something, it's playing the game, I think, in my opinion. It's like you can play a video game and be with someone who's like, oh, you're not doing it right, let me take over and I'll show you the moves, or let me enter the cheat codes. But what fun is that? I think really accepting that challenge, plugging into this, I don't even know what to call it. I want to say material world, but that's reserved for like the technology and all the stuff that we invent. I mean, this playing into the game of this really real world, that we're like physically in. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that culture has a lot to do with everyone's happiness and everyone's level of fulfillment in life, because culture tells us that we need whatever's on the TV, whatever's on the radio, whatever the neighbors have, whatever the kids' friends have at school that they need and that they want. And that becomes really the object of our pursuit in life is to fulfill these superficial material needs. And we do it at big levels and small levels, but ultimately, you are what you do repeatedly.
Right.
And so, the more that, I work to give my kids the video games and get a nice house and all these things, if those are the things that I value, that I think are cherished by the people that I'm responsible for and that I care about, then that's going to be the direction of my path.
Right.
And so, you're gonna have to, recalibrate your values a little bit, change your priorities around, and orient yourself on what's most important. And really, that's just fulfilling your higher purpose and doing what you're passionate about. And we're trying to fulfill culture's expectations instead of our own potential, I guess, is really what it comes down to.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So what kind of things do you do repeatedly that helps keep you in this zone?
Meditation's important.
Yeah.
I think just most people would agree with that who live any kind of a spiritual life. And meditation's important. It's one of the few things that you'll see, an immediate improvement, in terms of, health benefits and practices. I mean, if you meditate at 8 a.m., when you're done at 8:15 or 8:30, I mean, you're going to feel 10 times better than you will the next day if you don't meditate. It's an immediate, it's an immediately acting factor in your day. Exercise is super key. Meditation's a thing. And by the way, I'm actually writing a book about this.
Oh, cool.
Sort of these practices that I've found in my own life, and then I'm so blessed to have a circle of friends around me and family who, a dozen or 15 people who are all wonderful people and supportive people, and we've sort of coalesced together on this journey, and as we implement these things collectively in our lives, everyone gets together on the weekends or whatever, and we have a cookout and talk about the changes that have taken place since the last time we met because of these types of practices and methods that we implement in our lives. So that's essentially what the book is about. It's just these different steps of trying to maintain balance in your life, and meditation is super key. Exercise is super key. We sit down a lot as a culture, and it's really not good for you.
Right.
So we have to exercise.
Yeah. It's the spine is not the best design, I think, on the human body. So it's like constantly taking the brunt on our backs and everything. It's really, I've been recently going to a chiropractor. I never went in my life before, and it's really, really helped me. And I try and stand as much as possible and walk. And meditation, like you mentioned, even if it's just, I think people have this idea that they have to sit there and have their thoughts totally blank for like an hour or whatever. Even if it's just 5 minutes that you take, take 10 breaths and sit, just do that every day as much as you can. And it really does make a world of difference. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And I've actually got a section in my book about conscious breathing, and just taking 60 seconds. If you're feeling stressed, just sit for 60 seconds and just breathe consciously and become aware of your breath, control your breath. And, there's a lot that you can accomplish with that. Breath control is really, I think, at the root of any meditative practice. It always seems to come back to breath control. Yeah. It's one of the most powerful things you can do. And it's quick acting, again, like you said. So you don't need 15 minutes of quiet time, because a lot of us don't have that. We have kids, jobs, and everything else. So just taking 60 seconds to go to a quiet spot and focus on your breathing can reset, a chaotic morning, in 60 seconds. It's really powerful.
Oh, totally. And, it's even like I keep bringing it back. I'm like, it can even be smaller. Like, even if it's just one deep breath, I bet that there's people out there that go their whole days without taking one really deep, slow inhale and exhalation. And even just doing that can slow things down a little bit. But it's interesting that we're living in this environment that makes that seem so, I don't know.
Radical.
Yeah, like radical or like intangible or unrealistic or something like.
Yeah, you just think, oh man, there's no way I could stop in the middle of my day and breathe for 60 seconds. Are you crazy? I don't have that kind of time, but I mean, we do. And we spend a lot more time than that on social media every day.
Yeah.
But that's a big one, and I think another big one is hydration. I think it deserves its own place in a book, just hydration, because of all of the things that happen when you don't hydrate, and the difference in your mood, your thought processes, your neurochemistry, your biochemistry, your gut, everything that goes on in your body is impacted drastically by lack of hydration or versus proper hydration.
Yeah.
And we live in a society where we have lots of options, right? So we've got lots of sodas and all kinds of things that we can drink besides water. And I used to think, God, 5 or 6 big glasses of water a day, 8 glasses of water a day. And it's like, man, I'm good. I've had plenty of water for the day. Now I carry around a gallon jug that I fill up 2 or 3 times a day, and I just drink water and, take a leak constantly. And,
so simple, so important. Yeah.
You can tell the difference, if you're dehydrated, and sometimes I don't do great. And then, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all of a sudden my head's foggy and I feel sluggish, and I'm like, oh shit, I didn't drink enough water. And I'll go pound half a gallon of water, and 10 minutes later, it's like I took a super pill or something. We just overlook the simple things, I think. And a lot of that comes down to science overcomplicating things in health class and in science class. Yes. And it's such a a labyrinth of knowledge to try to, understand the inner workings of the human body as it pertains to health. And the same as it is in the psychology community for the mind and neuroscience with the brain. It's like these things can be reduced down to a lot simpler explanations than what we're given. I just did a podcast with the brilliant polymath Robert Grant, and we spent some time talking about that. And this guy's one of the smartest people probably walking the earth today. Cracked the prime number pattern, which is obviously one of the oldest and greatest mysteries in the field of mathematics since Egypt. We always thought we couldn't crack that. Robert did fairly recently, but very smart guy, and we spent a lot of our time talking about this. The way that the scientific community has, created so much complexity and so much confusion around concepts that people all over the world in ancient times and in tribal settings, they understood in very simple terms. And that's when you start looking at Hermeticism as a viable sort of bridge between science, spirituality, and psychology, and neuroscience, and biology, and everything else.
Yeah, totally. Tribal societies know what they're doing, and we tend to look at them as primitive, savage. That's that's really like the prevailing lie about them, I would say. And I just did a podcast the other day with this guy Chris Ryan, who wrote a book called Sex at Dawn, and his next book is called Civilized to Death. And so we were talking a lot about these kinds of things, and he writes about hunter-gatherers and stuff. And so the ways that they live, it's very important. And the things that you brought up about what you do every day to be plugged in, and community is a big part of that thing. Having the people around you, that's huge. You're mentioning your family, your friends, a good network there. But the primitive society, the things that we view as primitive societies, there's this great book called Society Against the State by Pierre Clastrace, I think is his last name. And he talks about look, they knew how to keep things in balance. Yeah. And that's sort of the intelligent position, because they spent their time with leisure, hanging out, enjoying sacraments and ceremonial settings. And then, they would hunt and they would gather and they would do those sorts of things. But they didn't need to do it to excess. And that was the sort of lesson and that's a good lesson, I think, that we can use for this time,
Yeah, I think so. And the within Hermeticism, within the Hermetic belief system, which is, for anyone who doesn't know what the Hermetic belief system is or what Hermeticism is, it's a system of ideas and philosophies on life in the universe that go back at least to ancient Egypt. We can trace that down back to the Renaissance, back to the time of Christ with the Gnostics, back to the Neoplatonists, back to Greece, back to Egypt. And it's called Hermeticism because obviously the Greek god Hermes was the messenger of the gods. And that was the Egyptian god Thoth, who was supposedly the founder of, or the creator of all sciences and math and writing and all that stuff. But what the Hermetic principles state, among many other things, is there's a principle of correspondence, which says that as above, so below, as within, so without, as with the universe, so with the soul, as with the microcosm, so with the macrocosm, and so forth.
Yeah.
And there's also an understanding of duality within Hermeticism, which is to say that everything in the universe has male and female energies within it, or aspects to it. And if you look at tribal beliefs from all over the world throughout history, and you look at some of the high civilizations of the past, like the great Hindu civilizations of the past and the Egyptians and all that, you'll continue to find all over all over the world, you'll find this understanding of that duality in the way that you say. And if we understand, this is where I talk about, how this is why I say it's so simple, and it's been overcomplicated in modern times. But really, if you can reduce everything down to the male and female aspects, the positive and negative polarities of everything in life, whether it's a thought or a possession or a relationship or, anything that you can really think of has implications in the material and in the spiritual. And being able to find and maintain balance, keep that needle right in the middle of that scale is where you're going to find yourself in, getting into flow states, as they say, getting into a flow state, being in the flow. It's that balance between discipline and surrender. It's the balance between materialism and spirituality. And that's really, what my message is at the core, I guess, is just, trying to help people understand the concept of duality and balance within that duality. And, for me, being a guy who, runs a technology company in the 21st century, but then also grew up out in the boonies, running through the forest and the trees and all that stuff, there's been some balance in my life experience that I just stumbled into. And when I reflected on my life, I thought, man, if I could help people, I don't want everyone to move off into the woods necessarily, right? I'm not saying we all need to go move off into the rainforest and live like this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? We don't. I didn't grow up in the jungle, running around with a loincloth on, spearing jaguars. So I can't proselytize for that lifestyle.
Yeah.
I wouldn't try to push anyone into that lifestyle, like, go quit your job, working at the law firm and go move to the jungle. But I would like for people to, take account of their inventory in life and say, okay, where am I at on this overall, generally speaking, in my life? Am I living a more materialistic lifestyle or a more spiritual lifestyle? Or am I maintaining a pretty good balance? Because most people aren't maintaining a lot of balance on that scale in their life, right? So it's like, how often do you go out into nature? How often do you, just go sit quietly beside a river and listen to the water run and just feel the leaves moving around you? And, how much time do you spend doing the things that really fulfill your soul, whether it's learning to paint or learning to draw or playing music or, writing poetry or whatever it is. And that's one way that people can really take their life, by the horns and affect change, is go sit down right now and go draw a picture, work out the creative centers in your brain. You'll find it to be soothing and calming and nourishing. And you do it enough, after a few days or a week or whatever, it's just like working out in the gym. Your creative centers act like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. But once you start using it, you get that back, and you can restore balance to the way that you see things, right? So like I used to have a really left brain sort of perspective on most things. And that was because of what I did for a living. But I wasn't drawing, writing, creating, doing any of that stuff. And so from the outset of this journey, I realized that, that doing things creatively was going to balance me out. And you might not believe it, but just by training yourself to draw pictures, to write poetry, to play music or whatever, if you're a musician, it impacts the way that you interact with your kids. It impacts the way that your perspective builds itself around your job. It changes the way you react to certain situations and the way that you understand other people's behavior, because, this dualistic nature of our brain, the masculine and feminine within us, it's a real thing, and everything is everything. Everything's connected, and as within, so without. If you create and maintain balance in your own mind and your own spiritual being, then that balance will spiral itself out into every relationship and interaction in your life.
Totally. Yeah. I was just talking about this today. This kind of manifestation of the external world is coming out of what's going on inside of us. So if you're straightening out your inside, if as Jordan Peterson says, cleaning your room,
right.
That's it. That's the reflection there. If you have a clean body, mind, soul, you're going to have a clean exterior sense of what you want to construct in the world. I'm a firm believer in that. You mentioned Hermeticism, and I wonder, do you think this is because you've discovered a lot of different things, and myself, I'm looking at all, theosophy and this and that. And so do you think that this is a kind of a good prevailing model for you, or do you just kind of acknowledge it as one of the, like, what are some of the top sort of wisdom that you've discovered? Let's just say, categorize it as general wisdom that you appreciate.
Sure. I'll try not to be too wordy with this, but I feel like there's an answer that I want to give, and I'm going to try to lay this out, and I don't know if I'll be able to pull it off or not, so hang with me.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I'm with you.
Native Americans and lots of what we would consider more primitive or simple tribal people, like you said, they have the same concepts of duality, essentially, that, the more complex or advanced Hermeticism also has within it. But it's simpler, but they were simpler people that lived simpler lives. Their societies weren't as complex. Their government structures weren't as complex. Their religious structures weren't as complex. All that stuff was simpler. The thing about Hermeticism, I think, that, to answer your question, that I think makes it sort of probably I don't know if it's sort of the prevailing belief system that I adhere to, or maybe it's better to say that it's the cornerstone of, this whole village of belief systems that I've combined in my own mind, and
right.
That we sort of practice. But it's the reason why Hermeticism is so effective is that it is sort of it's sort of complex. It's not complicated and it's not confusing, but it's advanced. I mean, they've taken a simple principle of duality, and they have created within the Hermetic traditions. They've created so much information and so many different principles that we can use to understand the universe. You wouldn't hear something like as above, so below, as within, so without, all that stuff. You wouldn't hear that, or a lot of other Hermetic principles, from a simpler tribal culture, because
right.
their scientific need for that level of detail in their philosophy wasn't as high
right.
as it was in, say, ancient Egypt, which was an extremely advanced culture,
mm-hmm.
or even in Greece,
mm.
right? So Hermeticism is sort of really just it's a more immersive philosophical belief set into duality than the other beliefs around duality that you'll find in other cultures around the world. It's more advanced, it's more polished.
Yeah,
and I think it works well. It was relevant 2,000 years ago. It's still relevant today.
Sure, yeah, and so the more sort of materially advanced or technologically advanced the society is, the more they need sort of a more advanced belief system, or set of belief systems to navigate that.
Yeah, because our minds are impacted by the world around us, and they impact the world around us, right? As within, so without. It's all connected. So, as we move into more and more complex societal structures and governmental structures, we also are exposed to more complex types of thought in materially speaking, more materially complex, thought patterns than, let's say, a civilization that kind of roamed the plains hunting buffalo and following the herds. Those guys would say that there's, the Native Americans would say that there's two wolves inside of every person, and they're fighting over the person's soul. And, which the one that wins is the one that you feed. And, that's just duality, plain and simple, right? In a society like ours, it may be hard to relate with that kind of speech about two wolves,
Right.
When's
yeah.
the last time you saw a wolf?
Totally.
On the street?
Yeah. I couldn't agree more with you. Yeah. We need, again, Joseph Campbell says we need a modern myth to live by of the day, of today. And he believes that this is a planetary one. All of these tribal societies, all of these civilizations, they had their myths, their stories, their symbols, their language to inform the sort of spectrum of values within that certain society. So today we really do kind of need this sort of global story, global thing. Do you see like any sort of emergent belief systems that you could identify as belief systems that are probably a bunch of other belief systems cobbled together? I assume that that's probably what you're doing, right? Would you say that's something that you're doing, is putting together these belief systems to kind of come out and with something that can work for our time now?
Yeah, that's basically it. And that's sort of, loosely speaking, I guess you could say that And that certainly is the theme of my total body of work. I'm working on this one book, that's really my prime project and has been for the last 2 years. And it's these sort of methodologies that we can implement, practices and habits that we can get into in our lives that, will help find and maintain balance. But it's not very religious, and it's not really super spiritual, right? It lightly touches on the fringes of spirituality, but it's more of a practical book than it is a spiritual one. But this is my prime project, but I've got four or so other books in the works that are all different things on mythology, on ancient civilizations, and then also on sensible spirituality. And that's sort of an extension of this book, which is just diving deeper into the spirituality and trying to cobble together beliefs from other ones, in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think?
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that obviously, the New Age movement would. I guess a lot of people probably feel like that is the answer to your question, right? Like that is sort of the belief system that supposedly ties together a lot of these other ancient belief systems. I personally don't know that I see a great exhibition of balance within the New Age movement.
Right.
And that's not to denigrate that or to talk down on anyone who's into that belief system.
Yeah.
I will.
I'll just it has a tendency to go more egoic and material, I think, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I find a lot of people I talk to that are into New Age belief systems. Their critical thinking is not always it's not always turned up maybe as high as as it could be. A lot of their scientific understanding or a lot of their beliefs are rooted in faulty scientific understanding. Things, in other words, that are not healthy spiritually or physically, right? And I think that. I appreciate what the New Age movement is about, supposedly at its core, and what a lot of the people within the New Age movement who identify with it, what they're about as individuals. But I think that, that there are some more practical, practical and effective ways to find balance and to maintain it in your life.
Totally. Yeah, I know we got a hard stop in a couple minutes, right? So I'd like to just kind of give you the floor. I want you to just kind of lay out, I feel like we're on a CNN show. So we got 30 seconds. Please tell me how to change the world. No, I mean, just kind of tell people a little bit more about you, where they could find you, and kind of what you're all about again, just to sort of wrap things up, I guess, if that's cool.
Yeah, sure. So you can find the Wayfinder podcast on pretty much any platform that you want to find us on. So we're on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play, and on Instagram. And you can just search for the Wayfinder podcast. And on Instagram, it's titled Shamanic Philosophy, but you can find it by searching for the Wayfinder podcast, just to keep it simple. This is the type of thing that we talk about. There's a lot of discussion on esoteric philosophy and on spirituality, especially the sensible kind, entrepreneurship, even parenting, psychedelics, meditation, exercise, different types of mindfulness practices. And I think that really, that's kind of the thrust of what we're trying to do with our platform. The whole team is just to investigate the metaphysical, and to investigate the other half of our nature as humans that we've kind of been raised and told that those things didn't exist, right? The woo-woo. And then find balance, and find something practical that works within whatever belief systems we cobble together for ourselves. And just most of all, trying to treat people with love and understanding, because there's really only two forces in the universe, and it's love and fear. And every moment you make a choice for one or the other, and it's the light wolf or the dark wolf. Which one do you feed? So, there's a lot of information that comes streaming in every day from the mainstream media and from social media about division and fear and suspicion and all this stuff. And, I think we need to rise above that. People need to understand that we have a lot more in common, than we do different. And just try to treat people better and raise kids that understand that concept and understand why. Just raise a generation of open-minded, loving kids to leave the world better than they found it.
Amazing, man. Yeah, I'm so on board with that. That is awesome. I love what you're doing. Shamanic Philosophy on Instagram and the Wayfinder podcast. Go search that out. Check this stuff out. I know I will be. I'm very interested in learning more always, and I highly suggest everybody stays in the curious learning mode because there's always new doors to open. So thanks for listening, guys. Adam, thanks for being on the show. Until next time, peace.
Mike, thanks a lot.
Hell yeah, man. Yeah, it was great. Yeah, we should do this again sometime. I really enjoyed speaking with you. So, yeah, and I'm gonna listen to some of the podcast episodes. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about Hermeticism.
Awesome, man. Likewise, yeah. I'll check out some of your stuff, and we'll get together and do a podcast on my show here soon.
Excellent. All right, have a good one, my friend.
You too, brother. Take care.
Take care. Hey, I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Hope you guys like these podcasts and enjoy them. And if you do, please spread the podcast, share it, tell a neighbor, tell a coworker, tell a friend, tell a cat, tell a mouse, tell a dog, tell an ant, tell a firefly, tell whoever you tell. Share it, spread it, like it, all that good stuff. If you really love the show, you want to go a step further, you really want to help us out, leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, and go to patreon.com, patreon/MikeBrank, and patreon.com/MikeBrank, and you can donate as little as $1 a month, $2 a month, whatever you want. Help support the show that way as well. But remember, I love you guys no matter what you do. I just love that you tune in and you enjoy these podcasts. Message me. I like hearing feedback. Get in touch with me on Instagram, Psychedelic Podcast, Mike Brank on Facebook as well. And thanks to our sponsors, SYNCHRO and Hemp Bombs. If you want a discount on ketogenic and plant-based nutrition products, go to SYNCHRO and type in the code Psychedelic at checkout to get 20% off. And they have amazing ketogenic chocolate fudge called Keto Mana that I have all the time because it has like no sugar and carbs in it. So it's great. And it's delicious. And if you want CBD, go to hempbombs.com and get 15% off all your CBD needs, I guess. And just enter the code Mike15 at checkout. But thank you once again to everybody. Thanks to Danny Barnett and Galaxia for the music, the intro and the outro. I love you all. Peace.